Welcome to Through the Trauma podcast. My name is Amber Larkins, published photographer, storytelling expert, visual artist, entrepreneur, speaker, and coach. This podcast was born from one question: how do I get inspiring stories of triumph out to the people who need to hear them the most? Come with me, enter my world, where lives are getting changed, heroes are getting developed, and greatness is being achieved. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Through the Trauma podcast. I am Amber Larkins, your host, and today I have with me Miss Leslie Draffin, and she is a somatic psychedelic guide, sensual embodiment coach, and menstrual cycle educator. I'm really excited to get into this conversation because, as you know, I'm a midlife woman. I'm in my midlife, my 40s, mid 40s, and this is a very interesting topic for any woman that is experiencing that change. So Leslie also has her own podcast, which is called The Light Within, and she is helping women just overcome these challenges. So Leslie, thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us today.
Amber, thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm excited for you to be here. So I was just telling you before we jumped on today that I just went and had some blood work, and this is something that's definitely been on my horizon lately. So I'm excited to get your scope and your view, and you being an expert in this field, just sharing with a lot of other women that are experiencing the same challenges that I've been experiencing. And I know, it's just something that comes with age. So I can't wait to get into it. So tell me a little bit about yourself and about, what it is that you do. And then I want to hear kind of what got you into this.
Yeah, for sure. So my name's Leslie Draffin, and in a former life, I was a TV news anchor for 15 years. And I really came to my current work as a somatic psychedelic guide because of my own deep inner healing. I spent about 20 years really numbing out through eating disorders and alcohol abuse because of this thing that happened to me when I was 18, where I was diagnosed with herpes right after losing my virginity for the first time. And so that shame spiral really made me feel very worthless and dirty. And while it did throw me more into my disordered patterns of alcohol use and disordered eating, it also made me get addicted to achieving and overachieving and hustling and trying to prove to everybody that I was worth loving. And for years, this served me really well. I was at the top of my game. I was earning six figures. I was great at my job. But internally, I felt very stuck. I felt like there was this massive disconnect between the person I put out there into the world and the person who I really was. And I didn't understand how to combine those two and really begin to live a life that felt vibrant and authentic. And I tried all of the things Western medicine said to do, the pills and the therapy. And what really finally helped me was a spiritual awakening, learning to reconnect with my body through cyclical living, which means living in tune with your menstrual cycle. And finally, microdosing psychedelic medicine in the form of magic mushrooms so that I could uncover my big root wounds and start to move forward in a more conscious way. And so I've been on this path of healing for about 5.5 years. And now I help women just like me who might see themselves as overachievers and perfectionists, but who really feel overwhelmed and burnt out. I help them move through whatever trauma feels like it's blocking them and find ways to really create the life of their dreams.
This is amazing because you do this in conjunction with the natural cycles of one, aging, and the natural cycles of our feminine cycles from month to month. Because obviously, if you're a woman, I don't care if you're 20 or 40, maybe older, I don't know, because I'm in my 40s, but I know that it doesn't matter. Your moods fluctuates depending on the time of month that it is. So I love that you are in tune with this. And I definitely want to hear more. I'm very interested in the psychedelics. I've covered this some on the podcast, but I'm always interested to know more because it's really a kind of it's not a new modality, but it's catching more traction
Yeah,
nowadays,
we're
would you
definitely in
say?
a renaissance. We're in probably the third or fourth wave of the renaissance because of how much federal funding is going to studying these for their therapeutic benefits. And yeah, it's kind of gotten so big thanks to celebrities. And that's good and bad. And really what I do is help folks understand how to use things safely. But for sure, it's like becoming in the local vocabulary. The folks you never think would be talking about psychedelics are talking about it now. So I'm so happy to be here sharing about it here.
Can you share a little bit about, like, how did you discover this? Like, you experienced trauma,
Mhm.
and then how did you uncover this particular modality?
So what's so interesting about my story is I never really thought I had any trauma. I couldn't really pinpoint anything major in my life that was this big traumatic episode. Being in TV, I did so many stories about PTSD, around 2010 to 2012 because I was a military reporter. And I did all of these stories with mental health professionals in the pandemic about trauma, but I didn't identify as someone who had it myself. But I had all of the signs and symptoms, right? And so in early 2022, after I've already been trying my best to meditate and become more mindful, at this point, I've already done a ton of work to heal my menstrual cycle and connect with my womb. I heard about psychedelics on a podcast. So if you're hearing about it now, that's exactly how I heard about it. And I was immediately moved by the woman who was speaking. I had her on my show, and the second we hung up the call, I hired her because she had this way of explaining psychedelics and their transformative therapeutic benefits for trauma and for the trauma I knew, I think subconsciously that I had, which was around sex and sexual shame. So I really did a bit of research, as one does, um, and was so excited to move into this more holistic path that I just kind of jumped all the way in. I had a lot of internal bias and internal taboo around it that I really had to work through in the beginning because I was a child of the post Reagan era. I was a dare kid. My dad's a preacher from the deep South. So it's like I had to do some internal work around, is this right? Is this okay? Even though in so many places, it's still not legal, and decide if the risk was worth the reward for me. And I can tell you, hands down, it has been. So that's kind of how I found out about it.
Mm. Yeah, and I've heard from the people that I've talked to that have used psychedelics for healing, I have heard amazing results
Yeah.
from it. And I just believe, and I feel like it's like comes with prefacing that, everything has to be used with consideration. Like,
Yeah.
it can't be abused,
Right.
but there's so many things that is perfectly legal, like food, that people abuse, right?
Alcohol.
I mean, alcohol, yeah, the things that are legal that people abuse on a daily
Mhm.
basis. So, um, just because it's not necessarily like mainstream,
Yeah.
I guess you would call it, it doesn't mean that it's not helpful
Mhm.
and people are not seeing amazing results from using these types of modalities.
Yeah.
So I'm excited that it's getting a little more traction. I'm
Mhm.
excited that more people's learning about it because going through life with trauma I don't feel like it's what we're called to be. When
Mhm.
you are dealing with unhealed trauma, it's holding you back from being the person that you really need to be and
Yeah.
helping people where, that you're called to help, those people that are aligned with you that you can help through trauma.
Yeah.
So I think it's a beautiful thing. So with all that being said, like, share with us a little bit about how this all works together, how you figured out how this works together with the female cycle.
Yeah. So in 2020, I came off of hormonal birth control, and that launched me into about a 9-month period of like chaos. My hair fell out. I got cystic acne. My period did not come back. I lost my libido completely, and I was diagnosed with PCOS. And so at this point, I'm still, moving toward my spiritual journey, which means for me that I'm, becoming more mindful and trying to connect with my body more often. And yet I lived predominantly in my masculine energy. And so I thought I could just do everything right. This is a big theme in my life. If I do everything right, it'll work out. So I was trying to eat all the right foods and take the right supplements and work out for my cycle. But all that got me was more stress, which is the worst thing for your cycle. So I entered into a coaching program because of how much work I was doing on my cycle. One, to continue my own healing, but because I was so passionate about this and I had seen how much it made me feel more authentic. And I entered into a coaching program in early 2021, which was the first accredited menstrual cycle coaching program in the world out of Australia. And so for about 7 or 8 months, I did this intensive training. And then I started to work with clients in 2022. And what I noticed is that when we start to work with the cycle and the womb, a lot of unprocessed trauma will come up. And this can be trauma around our very first menstruation. It can be around sex. It can be around uh, violence done to us that we might not have even remembered. And it can also be these little things that I find can really feel traumatizing to our body, yet might not feel like trauma to our mind. Things like saying yes to our partner when our body isn't fully ready to say no, or body image issues, or like those terrible things you say to yourself when you look in the mirror and it's a bad day. That seems to get stuck in the womb. We know that trauma is held in the body, it's held onto by our fascia. And due to the nature of that pelvic bowl region being largely empty based on the physiology, unless there's a baby or unless you're about to bleed, there's this like energetic space for us to stuff all of our shit. It's like our energetic junk drawer. And so when I began to work with these clients around their cycle, their trauma would come up. And I was at first like really freaked out. So I got more trauma training immediately. And as I continued my own healing and then began to work with psychedelics, I saw in my journal this thing I had written down, menstrual cycle and mushrooms question mark. And so months and months later, I'm like in the training for psychedelic facilitation because I had seen how transformative it was for me. And I really felt like my clients could benefit from it. And I'm microdosing on a morning, reading back over my journal, and I see this thing I had written almost a year before. And it dawned on me that every microdosing protocol out there was built by a man who does not have female hormones. And we know that our menstrual cycle and our female hormones govern everything about our life. So it would make sense that we would need a microdosing protocol built on the female hormones. So I started to do some experimentation and I created something called the cyclical microdosing method, which basically looks at the cycle. And for the 2 weeks before your bleed, you microdose up to 5 times a week. And then in the 2 weeks after you bleed, you knock it back down to twice a week. And so what that does is it backloads your time microdosing into the spaces of your cycle that are most often problematic, when PMS, when PMDD, when mood swings happen. And then you have less time microdosing in those weeks where you usually feel really good. And what I've seen is it's decreasing pain, it's decreasing mood swings dramatically, especially angry outbursts. And it's really helping these people that I'm working with feel more in tune with their body, which I think is the beautiful medicine of mushrooms. It's this ability to come back home to yourself.
So I've never quite heard it described like that, to be honest with you. Like this is, I mean, and I'm sure you get this a lot. This is really new information, but it makes sense to me. I can
Mm,
understand it because, because women are created. I mean, we're we're way different than men.
yeah.
And to your point of like, I don't understand how or why men have felt like they can enter the scene and kind of speak onto these things when they don't fully have experience. They could do all the studying in the world, but they don't
Mm,
understand fully. The same way that you or I can't fully understand the things that a man in a man's body,
Right.
what happens to them. I mean, I have a son. He's about to go through puberty. I have no idea. I mean, I can kind of think about what, what he's going through, but I don't know.
Mhm.
And so I just think that I think it's awesome that women are stepping up and doing these things, like creating these things, because it is so true that it's hard to relate unless you have experienced what a menstrual cycle feels like. You
Mhm.
have experienced what those PMS symptoms feel like, which it does fluctuate.
Yeah.
It's crazy to me. I I had someone tell me, oh, like that's all in your head.
Oh,
I'm like, you experience it and tell me it's all in your head.
yeah. Yeah, there's so much misinformation out there. And the thing that's such an important thing to remember is it wasn't until like 1993 that the National Institutes of Health even mandated that we had to include women in clinical trials and in research. And it still is not something that's commonly done because people who have female hormones, these menstrual cycles, they're not the same day to day. So they're not really that easy to study. You can't really very easily get like a placebo group when you've got, women who are in their menstruating years included in the database. And so sometimes when we see these hugely popular wellness trends out there, I'm thinking intermittent fasting is a huge one. They'll say that they tested them on women, but the women will have been in their menopausal years, which is a completely different ballgame as far as hormones go. So yeah, it's something that when I first uncovered this information, as a journalist at that point, I was enraged. I was like, wow, like this has been something no one's been telling us about. And we wonder why we try to intermittent fast and like we gain weight, or we try to do this common like wellness trend and it doesn't work for us. Well, it's because it wasn't tested on us. And yet it's still made popular based on findings that weren't ever studied on people like us.
Mm. Well, and like you said too, it's different. You experience that cycle differently as a
Right.
child
Mhm.
versus then you start menstruating, then you're a young teen or young lady, and then you go through the process like your childbearing years,
Yep.
and then you go through the process of premenopause,
Yep.
menopause, and it's like as soon as you get one down, hello, it's
Yep.
another cycle for us. So, I what I do want to know, like, what is your thoughts with you work mainly with like midlife?
Mhm.
Is that correct, or
Yep.
do you work with the women all ages?
I've worked with women of all ages. I love working with teenagers to help them like start their whole life with this information. But right in the past year or so, it does seem to me that the majority of people who come to me are between the ages of like 32 and 45. They're in the midlife area where um, they're out of their 20s, they're ready to change, or the folks that I work with who are a little bit into their 40s or even early 50s, they're empty nesters. They're finally able to give themselves the time and space to work on their healing, be it around their cycle or psychedelics. So I do work with folks of all ages, but the people who are around my age, I'm 38, to like 45, seem to be the ones who find me and who are ready for the work.
Mhm. Yeah, I think there's probably a reason for that as well. Because based on just people I've spoke to and then my own personal experience, I feel like something happens around that 40-year mark where it's like it did in myself, and I can speak from experience. Like when it was around that late 30s, early 40s, I had a lot of life transition too. I mean, I went
Mhm.
through a divorce and there was a lot of transition there. But there was something that happened where I was just like, I got on this path of like, I want to be the best I can
Mhm.
be. And then it's almost like that's when the hormonal stuff started. So it's like, you're getting affected by that.
Mhm.
So now I'm at this place where I'm like, I want to just be the best me. I'm like in my best years.
Mhm.
I enjoy life better than I've ever enjoyed life my entire life. And it's like, I'm I'm just getting started. I'm too young to like let it all go.
Yeah.
So how can I transform things? This is why, I went and had all my blood work done. This is why I want to, and I from other women that I've talked to that are my age, I think it's common for women to want to grow in self growth and physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, all the things.
Yeah. I think, when we look at the different archetypes, because we kind of mentioned this a minute ago, you were mentioning all the different women that we are in one lifetime, right? The child and the teen and the mom and all of those. When we look at the archetypes of the feminine, and the way that those archetypes really do coincide with the menstrual cycle. We've got the maiden, which is like you and your youth. We have the mother. We've got the wild one is usually what I call her, like the wild woman, and then the wise woman. And so something happens when we are in our midlife in the transition from that nurturing mother energy into the wild one, where we're like sick of everything. We're ready to change. We're ready to just throw in the towel with all of the things that don't serve us anymore. And we find this laser focus to really focus on us, right? Like self care. And with the cycle, that's the phase, that's the premenstruum. So, like, think of yourself in your premenstrual phase. Are you focused on yourself? Are you really like, agitated, or are you feeling like you want to go inward, right? Those are all these interesting commonalities between the archetype and that phase of the cycle that I think really also speaks to women in this age group, because we're just so done. We're done with all of the BS and we're ready to stand in our power. And there's that like decade and a half, 2 decades or more before we get into that wise woman where, we want to be doing the work. So when we get to that era of menopause and postmenopause, we are now the teachers, we're the elders. So it's like this beautiful rebirth that we have to go through in this phase of life that can feel really bad at times and really challenging. But it's something that I have found honoring the body, honoring the cycle, and working with psychedelics to be really helpful for.
Mhm. And I want to get a little bit more into that, because you said something a little bit earlier in the conversation about the womb and how when it's filled with something, it's different than when it's like completely empty, and
Mhm.
we seem to stuff trauma in that
Yeah.
space. And I can see that. I think a lot of women, um, I do think there, I'm not really sure where this comes from, but I do think there is sexual trauma in a lot of circumstances.
Yeah.
And I'm curious kind of like how that coincides. And is it only sexual trauma that you see in the womb, or is there more trauma that you see coming out of the womb?
Mm, excellent question. So first, I think what's important to think about is, the physiology and like the anatomy of the womb, right? Of the pelvic bowl. And it sits in between our hips, which we know hold on to so much trauma. It sits in these places where we've got our big muscles, and it's the center of gravity for most women. And it is the seat of life. So you might create a baby in your life or you might not, but regardless, like that is really this seat of life force, right? That's where life enters our body and exits our body, whether or not we produce a child or not. So that's, I think, really important to know just because it's powerful. It's really powerful, this area. And so, because of its power, it has so much potential to be a place that can light us up. And yet, what you were just saying is that it is also a space where we like to stuff things. Thinking of how much of our physical body is tied to shame in this region. Shame about maybe what your belly looks like, your hips. Like, just think of our diet culture, right? Like, is your butt too big? Is it too small? Are your hips too wide? Are they not wide enough? Is your belly too big? That's one thing that I have found really gets stored in this region is that negative self talk. And then thinking about what your genitals look like. right? Like so much shame can get tied up in what you look like down there. Or it can also be tied up in whether or not you're even willing to look at yourself down there. Because maybe your programming or your religious upbringing said that that was dirty, nasty, or shameful. Those are also things that can get stored in the womb. And then, yes, sexual trauma, I think, runs a wide range from the most violent, which can, of course, be stored in that region, to more, I don't really like to use the word small or soft trauma, but um, I guess smaller things that you might not even notice can cause trauma, like not being wet enough when you go to have penetrative sex, not feeling really that turned on, but you're with your partner. Maybe it's your partner for years and years and years, and you're like, ugh, let's just get it over with. And you go ahead and do it, but your body and like that region is not really in it. All of those little self betrayals, I guess, which is a good way to look at them, can also get stored there. And so when I was doing the work to reconnect with my womb, I love to tell this story because I think it speaks volumes to how trauma is stored. I was practicing something called cervical de-armoring. It's also known as internal vaginal massage. I did it on myself, and you can do it with either your hands and fingers or with a tool like a glass wand or a glass dildo. For me, that was easier, right? Just to be able to get into that region without like giving myself a full cramp. So it looks like a pressure point massage internally in the vaginal canal. And the way you go about doing it is going slowly, breathing, and putting a little bit of pressure on that really delicate tissue inside. And so I was looking at my vagina or thinking of my vagina like a clock and really traveling from the 12, 3, 6, and 9 location as I gave myself this massage. So I had been doing this for a couple of minutes. I'd set the scene. I had really great music on. The lights were low, candles were lit. And as I entered into, I guess, the middle quadrant of my vagina, I was pressing on the upper right-hand corner, and I immediately felt this pinch sensation, almost like that pins and needles sensation, like if your leg is falling asleep. And I heard the voice of a man that I had been with years before say, like, you fat bee, like you are disgusting. And I was
Mm.
like, dude, where is that? I had not even thought about this guy for years. But his voice like came to me when I gave myself that internal massage in that region. And so that shocked me like to the core. I thought I had already gotten over this man. Like I was in a really loving relationship with my now husband. But that energetic imprint of the lover that he had been one of my lovers, and the detrimental thing he had said about me was stuck there in my vagina. And so I continued to massage. I was crying at this point, using breath and sound to sort of help move that out. But I think that so clearly sums up some of the other energetic imprints that can happen in that region because of the people that we decide to let into our bodies, and because of the things that sometimes those people say about us.
Mm. Do you think this could happen anywhere in the body? I mean, in okay, so in the vagina, you can actually go inside there, but like if we store things in our heart, we can't go inside
Right.
there. If we store things in our, in our neck
Yep.
or in our shoulders or in our brain, we can't go inside there. So, do you think that we can store trauma in other areas of our body? And then if so, how do is maybe this is where the psychedelics come in? I don't know.
I think we can store it anywhere that we have that fascia. Storing it in our brain, I don't think necessarily is the same just because of the different tissue that's there. But, that's where our mind lives. And of course, we store things in our subconscious mind. But if you've ever had a massage, or if you've been to a yoga or a stretching or a Pilates class, and when you do a certain type of stretch, you feel emotions. Like there's a Pilates class I go to every week, and I always cry in that class. We do this like one certain stretch that really opens the hips, and I'm crying. There's another one where you kind of extend your arms like over a Bosu ball so that you're really opening the heart space, and I'll cry. So, absolutely, you can store things in other parts of your body, and movement and stretching and massage are excellent ways to move through that trauma that might be stored there, even though you're not technically inside the body, right? And that's part of what somatics is all about, right? So part of the work I do is helping people uncover where in their body things do feel stuck, and then giving them suggestions for different movement techniques to help them move through that. And it can be some folks who maybe have been attacked. When we're working on this, they may feel sensations in their legs, like they're getting restless, or their legs want to run, or they want to hide. Like allowing the body to fully move through a trauma cycle can be something that really does help to relieve whatever trauma is stored in your body, no matter where it is in the body.
That's very interesting because I have some experience working with like an energy healer, which I had a lot of doubts about in the beginning. Like, does this really work? Does what's what where is this all coming
Yeah.
from? Is energy even really real? And I'm a Christian, so I'm like, I look at scripture.
Yeah.
Is there some validity to this? And I think it's all through scripture. I think energy is like all through
Mhm.
scripture. So I started exploring it a whole lot more, and I can honestly attest to, the healing that was done there through energy healing,
Yeah.
which has everything to do with breath work and
Yeah.
sound,
Mhm.
and tapping into some of those areas that it may be hard to get to. And then I'm sure you've probably read this book, The Body Keeps the
Mhm.
Score, which is a very popular book
Yeah.
on my podcast. But that book first made me aware that we even hold trauma in our body,
Yeah.
because trauma is an invisible
Yeah.
force, but it's a destructive force, and it affects so many areas. And for so long, if we don't heal it, or if we don't try to become aware of it and heal it.
Mm.
So it's just really sad to me. It's really sad to me that it's not talked about more,
Mhm.
and that it's not made more popular, which is my hope through
Yeah.
this podcast, just to make it more known
Mm.
that everybody has trauma. There's no shame in that. But shame is a trauma.
Yeah.
And I know you alluded to that in your story. It was a huge part of my story, because of actions that I took when I was younger. And it was revolved around sexual shame,
Yeah.
um, because I was a dancer. I worked in a strip club for
Mm.
5 years, and coming out of that, there was a lot of shame.
Yeah.
And you know, you have to uncover that, and for years, I couldn't even talk about it.
Mhm.
I couldn't tell people that I come out of that. I didn't want any part of that old life.
Mhm.
But when you get to a certain place in your life where you come face to face with your trauma and you're like, "You know what? Everybody has shame, and I'm not gonna carry this shame anymore because I'm not that person anymore,
Mhm.
and I'm gonna figure out how to get rid of this shame, and not carry this around with me."
Mhm.
Now, does that mean that it's overnight? No. It doesn't come overnight. It takes work to overcome it. But that's why I think it's so important for people like you who are leading people
Mhm.
and getting rid of that shame, and getting to the root of the trauma issues, so that you can heal and grow and thrive.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that part of your story. But I think you're right. Like for me, I started talking publicly about my herpes diagnosis in January of this year of 24. And that was like ripping off a band-aid. It was so scary to be posting about that online. But like afterwards, I realized shame loses its pull on you and its hold on you when you let it
Mm,
out into the light. Like when you shine the light on it, it's like, okay, it's not so scary anymore. And yeah, there was a couple of interactions I had with folks from my past who were not too happy about me talking about this, but like it's your story. It's your right to talk about that however you want to talk about that or not talk about that. And I just think that there's something that happens when we bring shame out of the closet. What we thought was a monster is really just a little mouse. And we're the ones internally that are worrying and suffering by putting it there in the first place.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And, there's this whole thing of like it it, it was a pressure on my shoulders. Like
Yes.
I couldn't I I didn't want people to judge me. I didn't want people to look at me and ever identify me as that old person.
Mhm.
But what you come to realize is that people are going to judge you anyway.
Yeah.
They don't care if I was a stripper or if I was a saint.
Yep.
They don't care. They are going to judge me based on who I am today. And those that are going to judge me because of my past life, they're not in line with me anyway.
Right.
I don't want them in line with me anyway. But the people that I attract by saying, "Hey, this used to be me," and they're like, "Hey, Amber, like I need help in this area," that's fulfilling to
Mm.
me. So I've attracted people that I would have otherwise not attracted, even though possibly some people's walked away that is not really aligned with me to begin with.
Yeah. And
So what?
and I thought, when I posted about that, I thought back to the 18-year-old me who was verging on suicidal, who was so depressed, who
Mm,
was a freshman in college and felt so alone that desperately needed to hear about this, needed to know they weren't alone. And so now whenever I post something that feels stretchy or scary, I just think back to whatever version of myself needed to hear that message the most, and I do it for her because she's worth it. And sure, we get to evolve into a billion different versions of ourselves as we are graced with the privilege of being here on this planet in this life. And I just think of all the little versions of me every time I do everything. So, like, if I can make one other person feel not alone and not ashamed, then like I have done my job.
gosh, girl, you just dropped the mic. That's like because it's so powerful. It's so true. When you're concerned about whatever you're concerned about, go back to that area that you were in and like be the person that you needed at that time. That you had to suffer through those things alone.
Mhm.
I don't ever want someone to go through the things that I went through, and I was alone, and I too was on the verge of suicide. When I come out of that club for the last time, I went home and I contemplated it for 3
Mm.
days, how I was gonna do it. I contemplated it, and, I look back and I'm just like, "That was a part of my story, and I don't ever want anyone to feel like that. I wanna be the hope for someone else."
Mm.
And our stories have the power to do that.
Yeah.
That's the beautiful thing that I wish more people would really embrace. But I feel like you have to get to the bottom of the trauma before you can't jump on the scene unhealed. And I hate to use this word, but it's almost like vomiting all of the trauma. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like some people it happens and that's not pretty
Mhm.
either. It's like you have to get to a place and I tell people when they come on the show and they're like not really sure if they what they should share, how much they should share. I'm like share from your heart.
Mhm.
Obviously, you have to be at a place of healing before you can share, but it's powerful once you do share. But inside your heart like where you're at in that healing process and if you need more healing, go get that
Yep.
and then start to share because then it's so helpful. It's so powerful.
I had a coach early in my entrepreneur days, and she said something that still sticks to me. Share your scars and not your wounds. If it is still festering, it is not ready to be shared. Right. And so that's something that really
True.
helped me um, be able to speak about the things because if I'm still in that vomiting sickness, like the last thing I need to do is vomit all over somebody else with my unhealedness. But I also think like every s- I swear I have up leveled into new versions of myself like on such a constant basis that every single version of me had something valid to share with other folks who are maybe a little behind me on whatever their journey is. So even if you do have wounds that aren't quite scars yet, you still have so much healing potential in your story too. It's just like you were saying, are you ready to do it without it being something that's going to re-traumatize you? And are you self-aware enough to share things that won't re-trigger you? right? Because I think I wasn't ready to talk about herpes 3 years ago, 4 years ago, maybe not even a year and a half ago. And it like
Mhm.
you said, you had to get like to the underlying, what's the biggest fear about talking about this openly? That for me really helped to shift that story into something that felt like an empowering experience, and not something that was, again, the shame monster in the closet.
Mhm. And I feel like that comes with being intuitive and really taking time to, like, meditate and go inside of yourself and figure out what is really there. And then I think also, like, if you believe in God or higher power, you can tap into that too, because you believe that things are gonna happen that's gonna direct you and lead you, that's gonna show you
Mhm.
when is the right time. And I'll tell you, like, when I started sharing, and I only recently started publicly talking about this as well, but when I started sharing, I was at a retreat. I'm a photographer, and so I was photographing an event in on a private island, a room full of high-level entrepreneurs, and I'm just a photographer. And the speaker, she's, like, calling people out, and she's like, "Amber," and I'm like, "What? I'm just a photographer here." She's like, "What is your shame?
Mm.
What's your shame?" And I was like, "Uh, I don't know. I went through a divorce." And she starts telling me like, "Oh, you don't have to wear that shame." I'm like, You know what? Actually, I'm just going to be honest. Like, it's not the divorce. That's not my shame. I didn't want the divorce. So that I don't feel shameful about that.
Yeah.
I, I felt shameful because I used to be a stripper. And I said this in a room full of high level entrepreneurs. And I'm like, whoa, what did I just say? But it's almost like God put me in that situation. He used my mouth to speak this out before I could even think it. And after that, she said, you won't leave you'll leave this island and you'll no longer wear the weight of that shame."
Mm.
And it's so funny. I went back to my room that night and I thought, if I'm no longer going to wear the weight of this shame when I leave this island, why do I feel so shameful right now that I just spoke about this? And I felt like God told me. He said, "You know what? You There's always going to be people that judge you. It's not for you to wear anymore." And girl, I left that island and I didn't look back. I was able to talk about it. I was able to share my story. Um, and I'm able to share publicly here, and I'm able to talk about it without getting emotional or crying, or, where there for many years, like I would get emotional about it. Um, but it's a beautiful thing. And I tell that story only to say that in your heart when the time is right. And sometimes little things will happen, or people will run into your path, whatever that looks like. But if you're intuitive with yourself, like, when is the right time to start sharing. You have to look for those. You have to look for the opportunities and the right time. Tell me a little bit more about the psychedelics. Like, this is not legal.
Not in a lot of places, no.
Okay. So, how does someone even begin to tap into this type of healing?
Here's the thing. It is becoming more accepted, and the laws are changing in many places around the country, right? We've seen some big shifts in places like Oregon and Colorado. And there's towns and cities all around the country that have decided to do things like decriminalize certain medicines, psychedelics. Um, and so, if you're someone who's interested in exploring it, there certainly are ways to go about it safely, but it is a massive gray area, right? Um, and so that's something you have to be aware of. But I think that for some folks, myself included, when you get to a place of just being so fed up with what you have been handed and what the government wants to tell you is okay, and yet you internally know like there's something more for you, and that's, I think, when you start to branch out and you find things that are in still the subculture and that are taboo. For me, like I said, I really had to do a lot of internal work around that good girl archetype that I lived deeply in for years, who would never break the law, who would never, go against the things that her family had said that were okay, or the church had said were okay, or that, people in power say are okay. I had to come to this place where I understood that for me, there was a different path and that I had the right to choose that from my own sovereignty. And then, this is something that like lots of folks ask, which I don't talk about publicly, but I can at least give you this information. Like, do not order things online. Don't go into the comment sections of my post and see weird dude 76 or shroom guy 89 and go to their page and try to order things. If you are meant for this medicine, it's going to come to you in a way that will probably surprise you. You may be at the coffee shop and hear someone having a conversation. Your local herbalist store might have some really interesting information, or look up your state's psychedelic society. Almost every state has one, because it's legal to do what I do. I teach people how to work with this safely, and I do not give them medicine at all. Um, it's legal to have a psychedelic society and have conversations around this because we're blessed to have free speech. And so
Mhm.
that's a great place to start if you're interested. But I think internally it does require some work to reprogram beliefs that have been so widely spread by the media. And someone who was in the media, like, I can talk crap on the media. I was that. I was there. I was there for 15 years in the media and in that mainstream area. And so I had to do, yeah, a lot of my own inner work to figure out what was and what wasn't. And I'll say this, and I'm summing it up, but there was a man named Terrence McKenna who is really well known in the psychedelic space. And he had this quote, and again, I'm probably butchering it, but the gist of it is, a loving government did not make psychedelics illegal because they cared whether or not you would jump off a 5-story building when you were high. It's illegal because when you open your consciousness, you decide and discover that you're from love. And so
Mm.
you become ungovernable. You're not going to go to war. You're not going to put up with people being in power who aren't also coming from a place of love. That's the reason. And like the pandemic showed me how we don't have a loving government. So it's up to us to make our own choices about what's best for us, and doing it in the safest way possible, right? Like this is a very safe medicine, and yet it's still not okay for everybody. There are some folks that may want to steer clear if you have certain family histories or personal histories of things like schizophrenia or bipolar, if you have heart issues, or if you're going through acute stages of panic, grief, depression. This is an expansive practice. So if those are things you're struggling with, I don't recommend it. But for everybody else, it's not addictive. It's not something that you're going to do for the rest of your life. It has the potential to completely shift the way that you live day to day. And for me, it was worth the risk, of going against what somebody out there said was okay for me.
You speak about a lot of things there, and I will say this, like, I am not a fan of modern medicine. While I believe it has its place, and I believe there's, a time and a place for it, I believe that it's very highly prescribed,
Mhm.
like, without doing any due diligence, in lack of a better way of saying it.
Yeah.
So the difference, I think, with what you're saying and the difference in, like, modern, medicine that's prescribed for mental health, in some regards, like, the mental health medicine it's almost like, "Here, take this and stuff your trauma."
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
But what you're doing with the psychedelics is like, "Here, take this and then do the work, because it's gonna take work. But this is gonna help you do the work."
Yeah.
And it's a totally different process.
Yeah, for sure. And I love that you brought that up because from my own experience being prescribed SSRIs and anti-anxiety medication, it's a band-aid over the core wound. It never got me feeling better at my truest essence. And even with therapy, it still wasn't really getting to the core of like, why was I feeling this like internal pull for overachieving, this internal need to prove to others that I was worthy. And so while they're called magic mushrooms, it's not magic. It's not a magic pill. It's a catalyst to help you, like you said, do the inner work. Um, and to really start to look at the things that are in your subconscious. This is how I uncovered that, while that herpes diagnosis was probably one of the core traumas in my life. It was my birth trauma, being adopted, um, having a birth mom who was 12 when she got pregnant and 13 when I was born. It was this trauma from in utero, which is a very common form of trauma that's in our subconscious. And we've got no conscious, knowledge of that at all because it happens before we were born. But our nervous system is still fully alive and well as we're in there in our mother's womb. And when I started to understand that that's why I was wired for anxiety, that's where my issues around feeling lovable and feeling worthy really came from. And then the herpes diagnosis just activated it more. That, I think, for me, helped me understand what I needed to do to really help myself feel safe enough to move out finally of my anxiety. But you're right, like the medicines that were prescribed by doctors, aren't always the best route. And I think, you're someone who's religious, who's Christian. I'm someone who's spiritual. I don't, claim to be religious anymore. But I think that God put this medicine on this earth for us for a reason. And for me, that's why I think that it's something that is okay. And that's my personal choice. And right, like some folks may not believe that, but I really believe that it's here to help us become people who live from love, who love each other, right? Jesus' main teaching, like love your neighbor as you love yourself. It's so hard to do that in our current society. And I think that mushrooms can help you figure out how to do it because you learn to love yourself first.
Well, I'll just be honest. I would much rather take a natural substance versus a synthetic substance. Always. Like, I believe that our bodies were like magnificently created to be able to heal itself.
Yeah.
Now, of course, when we're inundated with toxins on a daily basis, toxins from every angle in our nutrition, in the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, or we're inundated with these toxins, and yes, our body is going to it's going to start creating cancer and all these different things. But and there's no way to fully avoid every toxin that we come in contact with.
No.
But if I had a choice, if I'm going to pick a natural substance or a pharmaceutical substance that was created by a man in a lab, I'm going to pick the natural substance. If that makes me not your kind of Christian, I don't know what to tell you, because I truly believe that God created our universe and created our bodies to sync. And I feel like Western medicine has started to not started. I mean, it's been going on where it's like, okay, take this pill for every little thing. Let's vaccinate. Let's do all of these things. It's going to make the body better, but it's not. It's deteriorating the body.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. And I feel like there's scare tactics like you brought up, which again, drop the mic on this about the government, like being scared of really opening our minds. But we have these issues with the government where it's like, they want to mandate everything. And a lot of the natural substances, like you have marijuana. Well, that is a very natural, it's a plant.
Yeah.
It's a very natural plant. And I believe, again, there's a time and a place for it.
Right.
I mean, I've smoked marijuana, but I don't on a regular basis. I don't now just because it makes me gain weight. But it's one of those things. It's like, if I am in pain because of cancer, or if if there's a reason for me to take that, I would much rather choose that than pain pills.
Right.
But that's my individual choice. And
no,
that's my thoughts on it.
No. And that for me really helped me make the final decision about why, for me, mushrooms were the choice I wanted to make. Because why, if I live in this state, I can use medicinal marijuana, but like 1 mile across the border, the person living there isn't, when we know that it can be beneficial for both people. Like, it's just an arbitrary, in my opinion, law And so same with mushrooms, right? Like when we're seeing things shift in Oregon and seeing things shift in Colorado, like what makes it okay for those people but not okay for me? Well, it's just because somebody said it was okay. It doesn't necessarily shift at all the therapeutic benefits. There's a case that came out of Canada earlier this year, which will probably blow your mind. There in Canada, you can I guess I don't know what the proper term is, but like you can petition to have like government assisted suicide if you are terminally ill. The government, and they did fight this, and so the guy won. There was a man who they were like, we'll let you kill yourself, we'll help you kill yourself, but we won't let you take mushrooms legally to like deal with the grief. They were more okay with this man's life ending than allowing him to explore living with his terminal illness for a little longer through mushrooms. Like, dude, what? Like, why? I don't understand. So, like, because of my past as a journalist and because I was literally born to be curious and ask questions, I think that's why I do all these these deep dives and why I present these questions for other folks to hopefully like make them get it too. But I also don't think I'm here to turn anybody on to taking psychedelics if they're not meant for it. I think that just like that podcast I heard years ago did the little spark in my brain that said, "Oh my goddess, this is for me. This is for me." This might be the conversation for you, but like I'm not going to sit here and be like this is for everyone. Although I wish that everyone would try it because I think the world would be such a better place if they did.
Mhm. Well, and at the end of the day, everyone has to follow their own heart. You have your own conscience
Yeah.
that you have to deal with. And so if someone feels like this is completely wrong, then it's not for
Right.
you. Don't do it. But my hope, even with my podcast, is just to bring awareness to different modalities because people are different. Human beings are different. Trauma that we've experienced are different. The type of life that we've lived is different.
Yep.
So this might help someone and it may not help other people. But I hope to get rid of like that judgmental
Mhm.
attitude, which I guess people could argue I have that judgmental attitude when it comes to pharmaceuticals, but I've done a lot of research on it,
Mhm.
and it's disheartening to me how um, we're being told lies.
Yeah.
It just bothers me a little bit, but I am passionate about that for sure, and I love the work that you're doing. I think it's amazing. There's so much more than we can even dive into just in an hour here on this show. Like I feel like there's so much more questions that I would love to ask you, um, but if you are interested in working with Leslie, you're just gonna have to reach out to her and find out for yourself and ask your own questions. But Leslie, tell us like where can people find you?
So you can find me on Instagram at Leslie Draffin, at my podcast, The Light Within. And if you do have questions that we did not answer, which there are so many questions around this practice, I have an excellent free guide called Activate Your Inner Magic. It is a beginner's guide to helping people understand how to work with this sacred medicine intentionally. And it also includes journal prompts, habit trackers, questions to help you get clear on if this is for you or not, and a guided meditation if you want to use it for your own microdosing practice. So I'd love to let you put that in the show notes. In that, you can also
Yes.
find a link to book a free call with me if you just want to talk to somebody who's been through years of training and you want to discover whether or not this could help you move through whatever you're currently going through. That's an excellent way to do it.
I love all of that. And I will for sure put this in the show notes
Perfect.
so people can get in contact with you. And then obviously when this episode drops, we'll put everything on social media as well. And then you have a free, or it's not free, you have a course.
A group.
Is it a course or a
Yeah, it's
class
a
or a
group.
group coming up?
Yes. So I do one-on-one work with people, and one-on-one work is expensive for a lot of folks. So I'm launching in October a group integration accountability program. And basically that's going to be for 12 people um, who want to understand how to start a microdosing practice, doing it mindfully, and with a focus on folks who feel like this could be the next healing piece of their journey to overcome anxiety or overwhelm or mental health struggles like I overcame, right? With my anxiety and my depression and my burnout. It's going to be 30 days long. You can get so many amazing transformations in just 30 days. And you'll be guided with me. You'll have a community support element through just a WhatsApp chat. And I really am excited because I think this is going to, one, offer folks the chance to have assistance affordably, and also meet other people, right? Because when we heal, we so often feel like we're alone, especially if we're going against the grain of society. So we need like-minded folks to hold space for us, to hold us accountable. And so I'm really excited about microdosing mindfully, which is going to launch October 1st.
That's so exciting. And it's going to be exciting to see the results from these 12 people, taking them through this process and then helping them, because it is different healing. Healing is an individual process, but we do need fellowship. We do need group support. And so I'm anxious to see the results of this group. And I know you're helping so many people, and I'm so grateful for you and for the work that you're doing. If you had like a final takeaway that you really want to leave my audience with, what would that be?
Let me think. I think what I want you to know is that no matter what you're struggling with, no matter your past, no matter your story, be it through trauma or shame, you actually have the answers that you need inside of you. You've just probably forgotten them, right? Maybe because of stories that you were told as a child or the way that you were raised in our patriarchal society, right? And I really just want to give you the power to feel like you can move toward your healing in a way that feels good for you, whatever that looks like, right? You don't have to follow the path that I have followed or that Amber has followed. But I really just hope that this conversation has made you feel like you have the right to choose what feels best for you and your healing journey. And you don't have to do it alone either, right? Like, I'm happy to help. I'm sure Amber is happy to help. There are folks listening to this podcast who you don't even know who want to help you too. So if you're struggling, reach out, and I really just, I'm hoping for the best for you.
That is so beautiful, and it's so true. I'm here. I mean, this is one of the reasons I have this show, just to connect people with the different places that they can find healing, because I think life is too short to go through life unhealed, and find the joy, get rid of the trauma, get rid of the shame, the guilt, all the things, and be able to find true healing and peace and enjoy life and thrive. So I think it's a beautiful thing, and you're helping people do that, and I love it. So thank you so much, Leslie. I appreciate you so much for coming on and sharing with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been such a great conversation.
Thank you for listening to Through the Trauma podcast. If you have found value in this episode or believe in the mission behind what we are doing, please subscribe so that you never miss any future episodes. Also, be sure to check out our transformation project at transformationthroughtraumaproject.com, where we help inspirational stories get heard on a larger scale through multiple platforms. If you know someone who can benefit from this episode, please share it with them. Until next time.